If you love heart-stopping action and tense showdowns against ruthless villains, then this story is for you. Imagine a lone truck driver, once a top SWAT operative, confronting a gang of outlaws with her bare hands, dodging bullets, setting clever traps, and safeguarding an entire community that never even suspected her true strength. It's a battle of wits and will, where courage and strategy decide the fate of innocent people caught in the crossfire. Trust us, you won't want to miss a single twist or turn in this high-octane tale, filled with both danger and hope. Curious about how our fierce heroine overcomes every deadly ambush and outsmarts her vicious enemies? Stay tuned to this entire story for all the gripping details and a conclusion that will leave you cheering. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories like this. Your support helps us continue bringing you the best in action-packed adventures. Strap in and let's dive into the ride of a lifetime. The afternoon sun hung low over the sprawling truck stop, its rays illuminating the rows of parked 18-wheelers, dusty pickups, and a solitary diner that had long been a local landmark. Located at the edge of a quiet highway in rural Montana, this unassuming pit stop was where Addison Blake parked her well-worn big rig after a grueling cross-country run. With calloused hands and a tired smile, she might have looked like any other truck driver swinging by for coffee and a quick rest. Her steel-gray eyes, however, hinted at a past that was far from ordinary. Every precise movement she made, tossing her keys into the cab, scanning the horizon before locking up, quietly revealed a heightened vigilance she'd never truly abandoned. Addison had driven through countless states and over thousands of miles. She found solace in the long stretches of open road and the anonymity they provided. In her late 30s, she kept her hair cropped short for practicality and wore a faded denim jacket that bore the patches of various trucking associations. Locals around here only knew she was Addie, the friendly driver who occasionally stopped for a meal and a bit of conversation. They never prodded too deeply, and that suited her fine. Truthfully, she had worked hard to remain just another face in the crowd, an approach that served to keep her past locked away. Yet, even in the hush of this near-forgotten truck stop, Addison could sense something shifting. It was in the uneasy glances the diner patrons gave one another when an unfamiliar motorcycle gang roared by. It was in the way an older couple whispered anxiously about new faces lurking at the gas pumps, their eyes flicking nervously from the road to the horizon. Word on the street was that a group of outlaws, refugees from a dismantled cartel, had begun roaming the region. Known to rough up locals for protection money, they sought new turf to exploit. The rumors didn't surprise Addison. She had seen too many such groups during her cross-country hauls. Yet she couldn't shake a growing sense of foreboding. She had no desire to confront violent criminals, especially when she'd chosen this secluded life specifically to avoid revisiting her own extensive training in conflict resolution, training gained from years as part of a specialized SWAT unit. At times, when the memories crept in, Addison would catch herself instinctively running through worst-case scenarios: escape routes, vantage points, and improvised weapons. That hyper-awareness had once made her an asset to her SWAT team, but now it felt more like an inconvenient reflex, a phantom of her old life. As the sun dipped behind a cluster of pine trees, Addison stepped into the diner, making her way to her usual booth. Faded photos of local ranchers and rodeo champions lined the walls, a testament to the proud, tight-knit community that lived off the land. She ordered her usual black coffee and let her gaze drift across the other patrons. Something about the nervous energy in the room urged her to stay more alert than usual. Perhaps it was the echo of an old habit, one honed through nights spent on high-stakes raids in a different life. Or maybe it was the subtle way that people cut their conversations short when a pair of rough-looking strangers sauntered in and took seats at the counter. Either way, Addison felt the invisible tension thickening, and she couldn't ignore it for long. Stirring her coffee in slow, measured circles, Addison kept one ear open to the chatter around her. The diner's ancient jukebox hummed quietly in a corner, playing an old country ballad that typically inspired a few folksy sing-alongs. Tonight, though, no one seemed eager to join in. Small clusters of locals watched the two newcomers at the counter with caution. The men wore leather vests adorned with cryptic patches, skulls, flames, and a stylized serpent. Their voices were low, but Addison caught snippets of a conversation that hinted at a search for someone or something in the area. She couldn't pick up the exact details, yet every fiber of her trained instincts told her these men were trouble. Back in her SWAT days, Addison had excelled at reading body language. Even the slightest shifts in posture or changes in tone were like an open book to her. These two bikers, stiff in their seats with roving eyes, were clearly on edge. The older one, sporting a messy gray ponytail, tapped his boots impatiently. The younger man had a twitchy leg that wouldn't stay still, like he was ready to pounce on the first sign of provocation. Years ago, Addison would have discreetly radioed in their description to her team, or maybe run their plates through a database. Now she simply sipped her coffee, deciding whether to slip out quietly or see if they posed a threat to the folks here. The decision was made for her when the older biker turned around and shot a glare at a middle-aged man named Carl, who owned a small ranch just a few miles down the highway. Carl's face paled. He was about to avert his gaze, but the biker snorted. "You got a problem, old man," he growled, loud enough for the entire diner to hear. Silence descended. The diner's waitress, a petite woman in her early 60s, stood frozen near the coffee pot. Carl's wife tried to tug his arm, urging him not to respond, but Carl was a proud rancher who'd never taken kindly to being bullied. Carl cleared his throat. "No problem," he said evenly, "just making sure everything's okay." Despite his brave face, Addison could see the slight tremor in his hands. The younger biker chuckled and leaned over the counter, fixing Carl with a mocking grin. "Oh, we're just peachy," he said, "but we hear people around here have been asking too many questions about us. Might be time to learn some respect." Addison tensed, recalling countless tense negotiations where the slightest wrong move could spark violence. She doubted these bikers knew she'd been trained to handle standoffs far more dangerous than a diner disagreement. At this point, though, stepping in might escalate the situation. Her best bet was to let it cool down naturally if it would. She raised her coffee mug again, hoping for a quick resolution, but her senses stayed razor sharp. Eventually, the younger biker dropped a few crumpled bills onto the counter, and his companion did the same. Before leaving, the older one locked eyes with Carl. "Be seeing you," he warned. With that, they lumbered out, the door slamming shut behind them, leaving a lingering hush over the diner. Addison exhaled slowly, counting 2 sets of footsteps as they started up their motorcycles and roared away. A new tension set in among the diner's patrons. Everyone sensed this wasn't the last they'd see of those men. And beneath her calm exterior, Addison too understood that these outlaws were staking a claim. She just wasn't sure how soon they'd try to make good on their threats. A day later, the morning air carried the scent of fresh pine and the distant promise of rain. Addison pulled her rig into a nearby rest area to grab a quick nap before hitting the road again. Despite her attempts to brush off the incident at the diner, she couldn't shake the image of those bikers intimidating the locals. She recalled Carl's trembling hands in the silence of the onlookers. These people weren't trained to stand up to criminals. They relied on the local sheriff, but that alone might not be enough if the outlaws returned in greater numbers. She told herself it wasn't her fight, she was just passing through. Then again, she'd seen what happened when good people turned a blind eye, and it never ended well. The rest area itself felt deserted, with only a couple of rusted cars and an old RV perched near the tree line. Addison decided to take a brief walk to clear her head. She locked up her truck and ventured down a trail that meandered behind the restrooms, winding through a patch of wooded land. The ambiance here was calm, chirping birds, rustling leaves, a gentle breeze that made the pines sway. It was the kind of peace she sought out when she left her previous life. The illusions of tranquility, however, were quickly shattered by the echo of raised voices coming from somewhere beyond the trees. Cautiously, Addison followed the noise, slipping behind a thick trunk for cover. She peered out to see a group of 4 bikers, 2 she recognized from the diner, plus 2 more who looked equally menacing. They were gathered around a frightened truck driver slumped on the ground. His rig was parked nearby. The trailer door swung open. One of the bikers held a length of chain, smacking it against his palm in a threatening rhythm. The driver looked terrified, clutching a bruise on his cheek as if he'd already taken a beating. The largest biker, with a shaved head and an angular jaw, barked questions at the man. Something about telling them where the local ranchers hid their valuables and who might be carrying big money. A chill trickled down Addison's spine. She hated bullies, always had. She remembered how she had once dedicated her life to stopping people like this. But confronting 4 armed bikers alone was a high-risk move. Even with her advanced training, the odds were not in her favor. Yes. As she watched them push the bruised driver around, a fierce anger welled up inside her. She reasoned that if she did nothing, the man might end up severely injured, or worse. Steadying her breath, Addison analyzed her surroundings. There was a fallen branch she could use as a makeshift club, plus the terrain was uneven, filled with roots and rocks that could serve as obstacles. Her best advantage was surprise. They had no idea who she was or what she could do. She weighed the risk of a direct confrontation against the moral imperative to act. In that moment, Addison realized she'd never be able to live with herself if she walked away. Bracing herself, she grabbed the branch, eyes narrowing as she prepared to do the very thing she'd tried to leave behind, intervene with lethal efficiency if necessary. The wind shifted and Addison realized she needed a diversion if she were to rescue the injured driver without immediately drawing all four bikers down on her. She crouched behind a cluster of bushes and lobbed a fist-sized rock toward an opposite patch of foliage. The rustling leaves drew the men's attention for a split second, and that was all the time Addison required. In two fluid strides, she lunged forward. With practiced precision, she swung the fallen branch at the nearest biker, one of the two from the diner, catching him across the back. He staggered with a howl. Before he could recover, Addison yanked the chain from his grasp and tossed it out of reach. The motion was almost reflex, a testament to the countless hours she'd spent in rigorous SWAT hand-to-hand drills. Still, the fight was only beginning. The biker with the shaved head snarled, reaching for a knife at his belt. Addison pivoted, reading the angle of his shoulders. Her mind instantly calculated his stance and likely move, a forward thrust aimed at her midsection. When it came, she sidestepped, grabbing his arm at the wrist and elbow. With a swift twist, she disarmed him, sending the knife clattering to the ground. But even as she tried to gain control, the other bikers closed in. She heard the scrabbling of gravel under their boots, felt an angry fist graze her shoulder as she ducked. This was not a staged training scenario. It was a chaotic melee where one misstep could be fatal. Sensing the driver in peril, Addison shouted for him to run. The man, wide-eyed with fear, scrambled to his feet and stumbled away, leaving Addison to fend off the thugs. Now free to fight without worrying about collateral damage, she pivoted toward the biker who just swung at her. He was bigger and slower, so Addison targeted the vulnerable spots. A sharp jab to the solar plexus, followed by a clean uppercut that knocked him backward. The initial adrenaline surge was on her side, but that wouldn't last. She had to move quickly, incapacitate them, or force them to retreat. In the midst of the chaos, Addison felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Part of her relished the familiarity of defending someone in danger. This was what she had trained for, after all. Another part resented that she had been forced back into a violent scenario. She had sworn off the life of weapons and takedowns when she left the force. But these bikers had left her no choice. A fleeting moment of inattention almost cost her. The biker with the shaved head recovered his footing and charged, tackling her from the side. The impact jarred her, knocking the breath from her lungs. They both crashed to the ground in a swirl of dust and gravel. Addison grimaced as she felt a sharp pain in her rib cage. Still, muscle memory kicked in, and she managed to roll him off, using her knees to pin his torso. Panting, she glared down at him, and for an instant she sensed the flicker of recognition in his eyes. That perhaps she wasn't just some random truck driver after all. She was something else entirely. Fear began to eclipse his aggression. Addison quickly gathered herself, scanning the area to see if the other bikers were regrouping or fleeing. She had to wrap this up fast or reinforcements might show up. A strained groan escaped the pinned biker's lips as Addison applied pressure, ensuring he wouldn't try to swing at her again. She briefly considered knocking him out cold, but the distinct crack of a twig snapping behind her forced a change in plans. One of the remaining men had scooped up a discarded handgun from somewhere, maybe from inside a saddlebag, and was leveling it at her. In a split second, Addison released her captive, rolling sideways to avoid the potential shot. "Don't move, lady," the armed biker growled, his voice tight with anger and a hint of fear. He stepped forward, brandishing the pistol with a trembling hand. Addison got to her feet, slowly raising her palms to show she wasn't holding a weapon. Though her stance was non-threatening, her eyes flicked around for a possible escape route or a way to disarm him. The pinned biker scrambled out of reach, coughing and holding his ribs. His eyes glowed with murderous intent, but he left the immediate threat to the man with the gun. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. The morning bird song had vanished, replaced by the heavy breathing of men whose pride had been wounded. Addison's rib cage still ached from the tackle, and her hair was matted with dust and sweat. She locked eyes with the gunman, recognizing the tension in his stance. He was scared, on edge, and that made him more dangerous. One wrong move might trigger a lethal shot. Meanwhile, she debated whether she should try another distraction or simply rush him. But if he got a shot off first, the consequences could be dire. A voice broke the silence. "Hey!" Everyone turned to see the injured truck driver who had somehow circled back despite Addison's earlier warning to run. He held a tire iron in shaky hands, breathing heavily as though he'd been running in circles, gathering courage to intervene. The man's distraction caused the gunman to swivel, giving Addison the window she needed. In a flash, she closed the gap, deflecting the pistol's aim toward the ground before the biker could fire. The shot rang out, hitting dirt and sending up a spray of gravel. With a practiced lock and twist motion, Addison wrenched the gun away, ejecting its magazine in one fluid movement and tossing both aside. The confrontation might have continued indefinitely, but sirens began to wail in the distance, a sign that someone had heard the gunshot or the commotion and called the authorities. The shaved head biker cursed under his breath, and the group exchanged panicked looks. They had no desire to explain themselves to law enforcement. With growls of frustration, two of them helped their wounded comrades to their feet, glaring daggers at Addison. She stood her ground, determined not to flinch. With threats muttered and curses spat, the bikers hurried to their motorcycles, revved their engines, and tore out of there, leaving behind a cloud of dust and the echo of their furious vows for revenge. For a long moment, Addison and the other truck driver stood in stunned silence. She could sense he wanted to ask who she really was, but the sound of approaching sirens was growing louder. Addison picked up the disassembled handgun and quickly wiped it for prints, an old trick from her law enforcement days. As a former SWAT member, she knew that explaining exactly what had happened and how might invite more questions than she was ready to answer. She tucked the empty gun into her jacket, then turned to the still shaken driver. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, eyes wide with gratitude and bewilderment. "Then let's get out of here before we're stuck giving statements for the next 5 hours, she suggested, motioning for him to follow her back to the parking area. The sound of sirens eventually faded behind them as Addison led the other driver, who introduced himself as Glenn, back to the rest area parking lot. Glenn's truck had a battered front grille, but it was still operational. Addison's own rig waited near the curb, engine idling softly. She took a quick moment to assess Glenn's injuries, bruises on his face and arms, a slight limp in his step, but nothing life-threatening. Relief washed over her. At least the man was still on his feet. "I appreciate what you did back there," Glenn said, voice trembling. "They jumped me out of nowhere, asked questions about local folks, ranchers, basically anyone who might have money. I tried to tell them I was just a contract hauler. Guess they didn't like my answers." He paused, giving Addison a once-over. "You handled yourself like a pro, you ex-military or something?" She hesitated. The old Addison would have flipped out a badge or explained she was part of an elite SWAT team. But that life was behind her. She had made sure of it. "I just know a thing or two about self-defense," she replied, leaving it at that. Glenn seemed to accept her vague explanation. After all, it's not every day you see a seemingly ordinary truck driver dispatch 4 armed men with such efficiency. He gingerly touched a bruise on his cheek, his expression a blend of pain and awe. "Look," Addison continued, "I suggest you get your truck fixed and maybe avoid this region until the local cops sort things out. It's not safe right now." She glanced at her rig. The bright day felt suddenly oppressive, as if the sun itself was glaring a warning. "I'm taking off too, but I have a feeling this situation is going to escalate before it gets better. Those guys won't just slink away." Glenn swallowed hard. "Yeah, I can't stick around either. But maybe someone should do something, warn the folks around here." That group looked organized. He hesitated, then climbed into his cab, giving her one last grateful nod. Without further conversation, both drivers fired up their engines and rolled out of the rest area, parting ways on the highway. Addison watched Glenn's truck shrink in her rearview mirror, guilt coiling in her stomach. She knew the right thing to do was to alert the authorities or, at minimum, warn local residents. But tangling herself in a gang war was the last thing she wanted. She drove for another hour, the steady rumble of the engine doing little to calm her nerves. Memories of her old life, of dawn raids and standoffs in abandoned buildings, kept invading her thoughts. She had left it all behind, believing that she could live quietly on the road, free from the violence and tension that once defined her. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The faces of those terrified townspeople at the diner, and now Glenn's battered form, reminded her that some fights are inevitable. Finally, Addison spotted a modest motel sign flickering in the distance, beckoning weary travelers. She decided to stop for the night, recharge, and consider her next move. She pulled her rig into the gravel lot, shut off the engine, and stepped out. The breeze was cooler here, bringing with it the smell of pine and the faintest hint of impending rain. Before heading inside, she paused, scanning the horizon. Her instincts were screaming that these outlaws weren't done. They would be looking for her. Maybe not tonight, but soon. And when they did, she'd have to decide exactly how far she was willing to go to protect herself and others once again. Morning broke with a light drizzle tapping against the motel's dusty windows. Addison awoke from a fitful sleep, haunted by a swirl of half-formed dreams that merged her SWAT past with the present danger. She dressed quickly, jeans, boots, and a flannel shirt, then grabbed her duffel bag. Inside it rested a small arsenal she kept for emergencies, a compact 9mm pistol and a well-worn tactical knife. She rarely carried them, but the altercation at the rest area reminded her that caution could be the difference between life and death. When she stepped outside, her rig glistened under the gray sky. She checked it thoroughly, scanning for any tampering. Satisfied, Addison climbed into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and merged back onto the highway. She had a delivery to make in a nearby town, but her mind was already racing with possible scenarios. Should she contact the authorities? She doubted a local sheriff's department could handle a heavily armed gang, especially if they were linked to cartel operations. Should she warn the community? The townsfolk clearly suspected trouble, but were they prepared for what might be coming? About half an hour into her drive, Addison spotted something that made her stomach clench. In her side mirror, a pair of motorcycles appeared, growing larger by the second. She tapped the accelerator, hoping to put distance between herself and the riders, but they matched her speed effortlessly, weaving through traffic to maintain their position. A wave of déjà vu washed over her. This was a classic tale, a maneuver she'd both practiced and eluded in her SWAT years. She sighed, realizing that outrunning them in a fully loaded big rig wasn't going to be easy. The highway stretched on, interrupted by occasional gas stations and farmland. When Addison noticed a sign indicating a turnoff for the same small town where she had a delivery, she made a sudden decision and took the exit. The motorcycles followed, maintaining a discreet distance. Addison's heart pounded in her chest, but her face remained stoic. She pulled onto a deserted county road, leading to a large barn where she was supposed to drop off farm equipment. The plan was simple: lure these bikers into an open space, force a confrontation on her terms. After parking her rig near the barn, Addison climbed out, scanning her surroundings. The property was vast, with tall grass and a few scattered outbuildings. No sign of the property owner yet. She unzipped her duffel bag, quickly strapping the holstered 9mm to her waist, concealed under her flannel shirt, and slipping the tactical knife into her boot. If this turned ugly, she wouldn't be caught off guard. Within moments, the roar of motorcycle engines shattered the countryside's stillness. Two bikers emerged, the same pair she had seen in her mirror. They parked at a distance, as if sizing her up. One of them, wearing tinted goggles and a menacing grin, dismounted and sauntered forward. "We've been looking for you," he drawled. "Heard you were real handy in a fight." The other stayed back, presumably keeping watch. Addison remained outwardly calm, forcing herself to breathe evenly despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. She wondered if they recognized her from the earlier brawl, or if they were just relaying a message from their injured comrades. Either way, she knew this was far from a friendly visit. Addison squared her shoulders, eyes flicking to the second biker who lingered near his motorcycle, hand resting near his waistband. He was probably carrying a weapon, but she couldn't be certain if it was a gun or a knife. The one who had approached her was taller, lanky, and moved with a certain cocky swagger that suggested he was confident, or at least playing the part. She kept her expression neutral. "You got a name?" she asked calmly. He gave a laugh that was more of a sneer. Folks call me Diesel, he said, circling around to her left. He's Trigger. He jerked his thumb at his partner. We hear you've been causing some problems for our associates. That's bad news for you, sweetheart. Addison held her ground. Your associates jumped a trucker, threatened a bunch of locals. That's bad news for them. She watched Diesel's grin widen as if he enjoyed a challenge. See, we're not from around here, Diesel continued, his tone mock polite. But we're looking to expand our operations. Heard this area was ripe for the picking. Lots of lonely roads, not much law enforcement. Only problem is, someone like you might scare good folks into fighting back. We'd rather they stay nice and docile. Trigger kicked at the gravel. So we're here to deliver a message. Mind your business or else. You walk away or we make you disappear. Simple enough. Addison could practically feel her SWAT training roaring to the surface, telling her to take control of the situation. She glanced at the open barn door behind her. If she drew them inside, the enclosed space might limit their mobility, but it also restricted her own room to maneuver. Another option was the open field, where she'd have to contend with two potentially armed bikers who might have backup on the way. Diesel took another step closer, his hand shifting suspiciously toward his belt. Addison braced herself. I don't want any trouble, she said carefully, her voice even. But you come after me, I'll defend myself. That's not a threat, it's a fact. A dark chuckle escaped Diesel. Feisty, he muttered, and in the next heartbeat, he lunged. Addison pivoted, deflecting his attempt to grab her. Even as she blocked Diesel, she kept half an eye on Trigger. He was fumbling for something, likely a gun. Her mind raced. Neutralize the immediate threat or disarm the ranged threat first? Opting for the direct attacker, Addison landed a swift palm strike to Diesel's shoulder, followed by a controlled chop to his forearm that sent him staggering. Trigger, meanwhile, drew a small pistol. Addison could see the glint of metal as he aimed. Immediately, she dropped into a roll, Diesel's wild swing whistling over her head. Gravel bit into her palms, but she managed to scramble behind the nearest cover, a thick wooden post supporting the barn's overhang. A single shot rang out, the bullet splintering the wooden beam inches away from her. Enough of this hero act, Trigger growled. Addison heard Diesel cursing, presumably nursing the blow to his arm. Crouching behind the post, she yanked out her own pistol and chambered around. The confrontation was spiraling, just as she'd feared. She had to shut it down quickly, but taking on two armed bikers who might be calling for backup was a lethal gamble. Gritting her teeth, Addison steadied her breath, mind flashing with all the training she'd tried so hard to bury. Now, ironically, it was the only thing that might keep her alive. Time seemed to slow as Addison calculated her next move. Trigger had already shown he was willing to shoot, and Diesel was still a threat at close range. She peeked around the post, catching sight of Diesel creeping along a low fence, trying to flank her. Trigger, in contrast, stood in the open, pistol at the ready, scanning for any movement. For a fraction of a second, Addison's thoughts drifted to the local ranchers who could easily stumble onto this scene. She needed to end this before innocent bystanders got caught in the crossfire. A memory flashed. Her SWAT team leader's voice during hostage rescue drills. Always control the angles. With that principle in mind, Addison sprinted to a nearby haystack, ignoring the searing pain in her ribcage from the earlier tackle. Trigger's shot whizzed past, missing by inches. Diesel saw her move and rushed in, but Addison dropped to one knee, bracing herself against the ground as she fired around at the fence in front of him. Splinters flew and Diesel dove for cover, swearing loudly. "Damn it, Trigger!" Diesel yelled. "She's pinned me down here. Do something!" His anger reverberated in the quiet countryside. A few startled crows took flight from the barn's rafters, cawing in protest. Trigger advanced carefully, each step deliberate, as if he thought Addison might jump out at any moment. He fired another shot that lodged into the haystack, too close for comfort. Addison knew she couldn't stay put. The hay offered minimal protection, and she was effectively cornered. She considered drawing them further into the barn, but that might give them better cover too. Another strategy loomed in her mind. If she could spook them into thinking the authorities were on their way, they might retreat. But after the fiasco at the rest area, these bikers seemed emboldened, not scared. She took a deep breath and inched around the haystack, searching for a line of sight. Diesel was crouched behind the fence, while Trigger advanced in a semicircular path, hoping to catch her from the side. In a swift motion, Addison fired 2 shots at the ground near Trigger's feet, forcing him to jump back. Then, glancing at Diesel's position, she realized she had an opportunity. He was partially exposed through a gap in the fence boards. It wasn't a clear shot, but it could be enough to wound him and break his morale. Before she could press the advantage, a truck engine rumbled onto the property. All 3 combatants froze. For an instant, Addison feared more gang members had arrived, but to her relief, it was a battered farm truck driven by an elderly man in a cowboy hat, presumably the property owner. He peered over the steering wheel, eyes widening at the sight of drawn weapons. Trigger, no fool, took one look at the newcomer and shouted to Diesel, "We gotta bail! More folks are showing up!" Diesel hesitated, seething with rage, his eyes flicking from Addison to the farmer. In that split second of indecision, Addison stood and aimed directly at Diesel, silently warning him to back off. Weighing his odds, Diesel spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he hissed, and scrambled toward his motorcycle. Trigger followed suit, hurrying to his bike. Engines roared, and they tore off down the dirt road, disappearing in a plume of dust. Relieved but still on high alert, Addison lowered her pistol. She glanced at the confused farmer, who'd stepped out of his truck with a shotgun in hand. "What in tarnation's going on here?" he demanded, voice quavering. Addison sighed. This was exactly the kind of messy situation she tried to avoid. But now, with the outlaws fleeing and the property owner demanding answers, she couldn't simply vanish without explanation. The question was, how much should she reveal, and would he believe her if she told the whole truth? Addison holstered her gun and raised both hands in a gesture of peace as the farmer approached. His shotgun trembled slightly, whether from age or nerves. She forced a calm smile. "I'm sorry about the trouble," she began, "but those bikers weren't here for a friendly chat. They've been terrorizing folks around these parts." The farmer cast a wary eye at the bullet-scarred fence and the scattered debris near the barn. He recognized Addison's big rig and nodded toward it. "You the trucker supposed to deliver my new farming equipment?" he asked, lowering his shotgun a fraction. When she confirmed with a nod, he let out a weary sigh. "Darn near gave me a heart attack, seeing guns blazing on my property. These fellas been making waves for a few weeks now, but I never thought they'd roll up here in broad daylight." Addison took a step forward, keeping her voice steady. "I'm sorry you had to walk into this. If I'd known they'd follow me, I wouldn't have led them here, but it seems they're expanding their territory, targeting anyone who might resist. Local ranchers, truck drivers, you name it." The farmer rested his shotgun against the side of the truck, looking exhausted. "Name's Maxwell. I've lived here all my life, and I ain't about to let a bunch of road rats ruin this county." His face hardened. "We don't have a big police force, though. Our sheriff does what he can, but resources are stretched thin." Addison weighed her options. She had every reason to leave. Her load delivered, her sense of obligation fulfilled. Yet she couldn't ignore the mounting evidence that these outlaws would keep escalating. Maxwell was far from the only one at risk. She recalled the terrified faces in the diner, Glenn's battered form, and now Maxwell's shaky resolve to protect his land. She felt the tug of responsibility, that old SWAT instinct urging her to step in and neutralize the threat for good. She took a deep breath. "Listen, I don't live here and I'm not part of any official force, but I can't stand by while these criminals hurt innocent people. If there's a way I can help, even temporarily, I'm willing to do it. I have some background in this sort of thing." Her final words were carefully chosen. She still wasn't ready to announce her SWAT past. Maxwell scrutinized her. "You sure, miss? These men mean business. Heard rumors they might be connected to a cartel. They ain't just some rowdy bikers." Addison nodded solemnly. "I'm sure. I've dealt with worse." Maxwell rubbed his jaw, considering the proposition. "Well, if you're set on this, I can round up a few neighbors. We can keep watch, maybe fortify a few places. The sheriff needs all the help he can get." Addison offered a faint smile. "That's a start, but we'll need a better plan, one that ensures they don't come back stronger." For a moment they stood in silence, the dusty wind carrying only the faint echo of the bikers' departure. The tension in the air was palpable, as though the land itself braced for the next confrontation. Finally, Maxwell shook Addison's hand in a firm grip. "Then let's get to it. We got families out here." And if you're willing to stand with us, we sure as hell won't turn you away. Addison nodded, steeling herself for the road ahead. She tried to escape her past, hoping a quiet trucking life would keep her out of harm's way. But it seemed destiny had other plans. In her gut, she knew she had no choice but to confront these outlaws head-on, unleashing the skills she'd kept buried for far too long. If that meant returning to the role of protector, so be it. She'd do whatever it took to keep these people safe, and perhaps, in the process, find redemption for herself once more. Looking back on the events that unfolded, it's clear that true heroism can come from the most unexpected places, like an unassuming truck driver who once served as a highly trained SWAT officer. Through clever planning and unyielding determination, she protected a humble community and helped them reclaim their peace. This victory wasn't just about outgunning a band of outlaws. It was a testament to standing up for what's right, no matter the personal cost. In the end, the community found renewed unity and hope, while our heroine rediscovered the part of herself that thrives on defending others. We hope this story has reminded you that bravery and justice can triumph over any odds. What did you think of the showdown and the clever tactics used? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. And if you enjoyed following this journey, be sure to hit subscribe for more empowering tales coming your way.